Wake me up.
Wake me up inside.
Wake me up.
Wake me up inside.
That's enough of that nightmare.
All right, welcome to the Superhero Century podcast, where we review every superhero movie this side of the year 2000. This is episode 5. We are doing 2003's Daredevil.
Unfortunately, not the Netflix show Daredevil, but the 2003 movie Daredevil.
But we're all here. I'm Dan.
I'm Tom.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Kat.
Daredevil. This is what we're doing.
Sadly.
Daredevil, a.k.a. Kat's podcast on Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner.
We'll get there. But just if you haven't listened to the show before, this is just a fun way to dissect the superhero movies of the 21st century. We've got some categories to run through. We've got some things and questions to break down. We just came off of Spider-Man. Overall, great time. Daredevil comes out, maybe 6 months after Spider-Man. It's still a Marvel property, a little bit different studio.
They're basically just trying to milk it at this point after riding the highs of Spider-Man.
I want to ask you, Matt, because you know more about Marvel than I do. Obviously, in hindsight, we think of Marvel as Iron Man, Thor, Captain America. But, it's like, at the time, really, Spider-Man was their main property, I would say.
Daredevil does have a huge cult. Like, the people that love Daredevil.
I was going to say, like, it seems like a weird choice now to pick Daredevil as like your big centerpiece after Spider-Man, but maybe at the time that made more sense.
It was a little more dark, a little more brooding, and I don't know like where it was in the casting, but to get Ben Affleck, I'm sure that was the hot property that they could get him to do.
Hot property indeed.
Okay, easy now.
I actually think that this was probably the only time Daredevil could actually come out because it was, it was in production before Spider-Man actually came out. They weren't sure they were going for the family-friendly angle. But it wasn't so late that they got rid of the family-friendly angle already.
It's not for families.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So, this one, had it come out 2 years later, I don't know that it would have worked.
We'll get into more if it actually worked or not. But let's get some quick facts. It was directed by Mark Steven Johnson, who is from our home state of Minnesota, born in Hastings.
Making us proud?
Yeah, he also wrote Grumpy Old Men, so I guess that's kind of cool.
Any Minnesotan that gets work, I'm all for it.
He also wrote this movie. He was a big Daredevil fan, wrote it. There is a director's cut we'll talk about in a second, but debuted Valentine's Day 2003. What a great
romantic.
Valentine's Day movie.
Love is blind is the tagline I can already imagine they went with.
Had a budget of $78 million, so pretty modest, but I guess a lot for the time.
Was that punched up at all, do we know, because of Spider-Man?
It was. They actually gave them an extra $20 million after Spider-Man made $800 million at the box office.
And that's what they ended up making.
Yep.
Wow.
It made $179 million at the box office, so a modest hit.
They got their money back.
Yeah. Let's go to personal reactions. What did this movie mean to you personally, maybe when you watched it originally? I know some of us just watched this for the first time, but what did you notice on the rewatch this time?
As I've said in previous episodes, I, got into the genre stuff pretty early on. My dad was into genre fiction. So I saw this. I either saw it in theaters or I rented it shortly after and was pretty excited. I didn't know Daredevil at all. And even back then, it was just garbage. This is not one that I watched and was like, yeah, let's put it on again. I was like, oh, that was so bad.
Growing up, I didn't know anyone that regarded it as a good movie, so I never really wanted to see it. I would never have rented it. With the few options I had at Blockbuster, I wouldn't have pushed for it. I can recall later in life it being on FX quite a few times. I think that's just when they were playing, X-Men and maybe the Spider-Man movies where they could just play it. And I was like, who is watching this? What little I saw on FX is not going to sit and watch that.
Yeah, I remember, I think probably post 2003 to 2010 or so, that was Ben Affleck's just everyone made fun of him phase.
I wasn't making fun of him.
All right.
Right. But I think, during that phase, everyone was like, oh, Daredevil, that's such a bad movie because Ben Affleck's in it. And nowadays, obviously, he's had some resurgence. He's obviously won an Oscar.
He's had his ups and downs.
Ups and downs for sure. But I think nowadays you can look at it oh yeah, Ben Affleck, not as bad as we thought he was in 2003.
I wish I could tell him it's not your fault, but it's more of just the story. He does fine personally.
That's one of the things that I notice on rewatch is that Affleck is definitely not the worst part of this movie. He actually does an okay job. His character's not the greatest, but he's not horrible.
So like I said, this is the first time I've ever seen it, and I absolutely hated it. I hated every moment of it. I like nerdy, movies, and I've watched any bad horror movie, like you name it, but I'm like, I'm not going to watch this, especially when Netflix has a perfectly great Daredevil. Why would I ever go back and watch this shitty movie? And it was just as shitty as I remembered. I hate all the style choices. I mean, again, like we said, Ben Affleck's fine, but like just the mood. It's like early
I'll say he's
2000s. Just the mood, like the leather. It's just like, let's try and be as like grungy and as like dark as we can. Like his character is like a darker Marvel character, but like not like this. Like I just hate everything about it. Wilson Fisk comes off as dumb. Like they waste all the characters.
So this might be an interesting time to bring up the fact that there were two different cuts of this movie.
That's fair. Kat and I both just rewatched the theatrical cut.
And then when I was younger, I watched the theatrical cut, but this time I rewatched the director's cut.
Tell the people what you did, Dan.
I had a great week. I got back from a vacation on Tuesday night, and I had Wednesday and Thursday night free. So I'm like, I'll watch Daredevil. I watched the theatrical cut on Wednesday. And, I was like, not bad. Not as bad as everyone thought. And then I read about this director's cut. And for some reason, everyone on the internet was like, the director's cut is a masterpiece. You need to watch the director's cut. Otherwise, you don't understand Daredevil.
Calling this a masterpiece.
So I, like a chump, rented the director's cut on Thursday night. I told my wife I'm going back in my room to watch Daredevil. And she said, didn't you just do that yesterday? I'm like, yes, but now I need to watch it again. It's a half hour longer.
It's not the worst thing you've told your wife.
Before I get to that, though, I want to talk about my reaction to the first one, the original cut. I don't think it's as bad as you say it is. Oh. It's laughable. There was a point, I think 30 minutes in, when they have that dumb fight in the park.
That is the antithesis of why this is terrible. If you can tell me one good moment, like I want to hear your best shot of why it's okay.
So when that moment happened, it suddenly shifted from this is like a moody of its time superhero movie to this is kind of a fun mess. And that's when I broke out a glass of whiskey and then just had a much better time with the rest of the movie.
I mean, if you have to get drunk to enjoy this movie.
This is my argument, though. So of these superhero movies, I think the biggest sin against them is if they're boring. I was never bored watching Daredevil. There's enough going on. There's enough good actors going in there. Like, I love Jon Favreau. Just like if he's on screen, like I'm having a good time. I actually kind of liked Bullseye, Colin Farrell. I think that was super fun. So like that was my biggest thing is like, this is not a good movie, but I'm at least enjoying it enough to, sit through it and it's not boring.
It definitely goes by really quickly.
I want to talk about the director's cut quick because I will not say it's a masterpiece, but I will say it's better.
What does it add at the end of the day?
So it's got a couple things. In the original cut, it almost seems like it's really Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner's like movie together. And it's like, his whole reason for going after Fisk and Bullseye is because she dies. Like it almost seems like that's like the turning point. Versus the director's cut feels more like that's just a thing that happens, and his overall arc is trying to figure out what's going on with this kingpin in Hell's Kitchen. There's a lot more focus on like the neighborhood crime and like the overall crime syndicate. There's a whole plot with Coolio as a guy framed for murder, and those scenes aren't amazing. They're fine. But I think it overall just gives the movie a little bit different focus rather than this is just Ben Affleck pining over Jennifer Garner and more about a guy trying to clean up his city.
Okay.
I don't really know Daredevil very well, and there's a few things that explain his character more. There's a lot more devil imagery, and one of the questions I had for the movie originally was like, why is he going by Daredevil? Why isn't there some kind of pun on being blind? Like they keep calling him like this devil, but why is he a devil other than his dad was?
You wanted a blind pun?
I don't know, like blind justice or something like that.
He's the devil of Hell's Kitchen.
Right, I get that, but the director's cut has a lot more of him almost being like Batman and like striking fear in these criminals using like this devil imagery, and like, okay, that makes a little bit more sense.
I mean, he is like one of the, if not the like most like Catholic of superheroes, so that's a big part of it as well. I think if you'd seen the Netflix show and known a little bit more of like his story, you'd be like, oh, well, this just mocks it. Like this doesn't handle it well at all.
Well, it's a good thing the Netflix show came out a decade later.
I wasn't aware of this, but apparently in the comics, Daredevil's mom is supposedly a nun. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
So there's a nun in the director's cut kind of thrown in the background, and she has like almost like a calming presence over Daredevil. So it's a little bit more of an Easter egg there. There's also a lot more Jon Favreau comic relief, which is kind of nice in a dark movie like this. And I like Jon Favreau in general. It just seems like he's a cool guy.
It's also a lot more violent.
Also, there is no sex scene in the director's cut. The really cheesy sex scene between Jennifer Garner and Ben Affleck is not there.
That's one of the things in the producer's chair section. I would have had that sequence be a little longer, maybe, especially in the director's cut.
So yeah, I would say overall the director's cut is a better time if you want to watch this movie. If you have an extra half hour in your day to watch Daredevil, I'd throw the director's cut in.
I don't think anyone's going to do that. I don't think Coolio needs the extra money. I don't think anyone should watch this movie, especially the director's cut.
I will say the director's cut, the scenes are kind of rearranged into a much more coherent film so that if you are really, really itching to watch Ben Affleck as Daredevil, and only if that's like, if you are really gung-ho, then I would say go director's cut over the theatrical.
All right, let's move on to some categories. I think we can have some more fun with this now that we've gotten our reactions out of the way.
More fun.
Some trivia. So this was filmed in Los Angeles, and you can definitely tell.
You can definitely tell. Kat and I just watched Perry Mason, and when they walk out of court, it's like clearly like L.A. Like it's the same set they used in Perry Mason. Like, wait a minute, is this New York or L.A.?
Yeah, and then the skyline scenes are like so CGI, it's so bad. Michael Clark Duncan gained 40 pounds to play Kingpin.
I actually kind of like the casting here because he is a very different type of Wilson Fisk. He's imposing, but he's also really got that charm. The kind of maniacal charm.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think he's pretty good in this, but to ask a 290-pound man to gain 40 pounds
That takes balls.
Yeah.
They wanted to use the Daily Bugle rather than the New York Post, but they did not have the rights. Stan Lee, Kevin Smith, and Frank Miller all have cameos. This is something that's come up, I think, in 3 of our podcasts now, but Chris Columbus was originally attached to direct. Like, Chris Columbus must have just been the guy, like, in every studio project, just like, oh, I'll do it.
Well, the man can make a damn fine movie, so it's like, well, we're not sure about this. Can we know it'll be a passable film? Call the Columbus.
I do love Chris Columbus.
He's on speed dial for all those studios back then.
Ben Affleck's milky blue contacts literally made him blind. Really got into character there. This movie was originally banned in Malaysia for using the word devil in the title.
I saw that. That's so silly.
Stan Lee did not like the movie, saying they made the character too dark.
When Stan Lee says he doesn't like your Marvel movie, that's enough right there.
Yeah.
Whatever Stan Lee says and does is always right.
Ben Affleck also hated the movie, and he said he would never do a superhero movie again because of this, but then he eventually did Batman. So I think Batman was kind of his redemption tour from Daredevil.
I mean, if
better or
anyone
worse.
asks you to play Batman, you always say yes.
Yeah. Affleck only wanted to do a sequel if the studio agreed to do a darker storyline than this.
Darker?
Yeah.
But he couldn't even see the first one.
20th Century Fox tried to reboot the series in 2011 in order to maintain the rights, but they couldn't get anything out of development, and the rights slipped back to Marvel in 2013.
That is painful.
I know they did the Netflix show, but are you a little surprised they haven't tried to bring this to the big screen in the MCU?
Yes and no. I mean, it's sort of a trickier character. Like, thinking about this movie, it's like it's hard to get all that in. And I think even moving forward, after putting all the time and effort into this Netflix show, which was such a hit, the idea of like showing an audience the same thing again, I don't know if we'll see him in the near future. If they do, they won't explain him at all. They'll just drop him in and you'll know his character beats.
Jon Favreau used this movie to start talking with Kevin Feige about making Iron Man.
I love that so much.
Also, the first time that Colin Farrell got to use his original or his own accent in an American movie.
Isn't that sad?
Thank God, because that's a great accent right there.
It is, but they intro him with the I Am a Leprechaun song. Where it's like, oh, just on the nose.
So, we already talked about Ben Affleck hating this movie, but apparently throughout filming, he also hated his hair and would just refuse to look in a mirror because the hair was so atrocious.
I agree.
It's bad.
You're better than that, Ben. You're perfect.
Okay, let's go into casting decisions. Some internet casting rumors, people who maybe were offered the role. For Daredevil, Ben Affleck was in talks for a long time, but Vin Diesel was an option. Could have been interesting.
Yikes.
Guy Pearce, which I think he could have done a good job with this.
Oh, yeah.
Matt Damon,
Of course.
Yeah.
The Boston Boys.
and Colin Farrell, who ended up getting Bullseye.
I did also see Ed Norton as a choice that was considered.
For Elektra, a couple other options were Penelope Cruz, Selma Hayek, Natalie Portman, Lucy Liu, Jessica Alba, and Katie Holmes.
No.
I also saw Eliza Dushku, which would have been interesting. I feel like that was the era of Dushku.
Real douche-coup era.
Yeah, and then also Monica Bellucci, which would have been kind of crazy.
I'm not super familiar with the origins of the Elektra character, but she is Greek, and I don't really see Jennifer Garner as being Greek. I could see like Penelope Cruz pulling that off a little better.
This is one of the roles where I think they absolutely cast the wrong person, and Kat's probably going to fight me. I do not like Jennifer Garner, and I
Okay,
think
but
she's horrible.
Okay,
in this.
but then I never want to ever talk to you ever again. So I was gonna
be-
like go a different route with that, but that is just
it's
what
going to
I
be
decided.
real awkward because we live next to each other.
But okay, but like I'm not gonna get into 13 going on 30 in this podcast.
That's the exception, though. That's the exception.
The exception is Jennifer Garner is perfect. I'm looking at a picture of her right now, and she's just a beautiful angel. So
Kat, while we have you here right now, I'm not an expert on celebrity gossip or things that happen in celebrities' lives. Could you give us like the 30-second rundown of Ben Affleck, Jennifer Garner, all that went down? I don't really care, but I kind of want to know.
2003, simpler times, man. I was looking at the pictures from the red carpet for this movie, and it's like all the members of O-Town. I mean, man, like these are the good old days. During the filming of this would have been when Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez were together. They were engaged for a short while, and at this time, Jen Garner would have been married to Scott Foley. And I think it was in 2004 that they both split up from their significant others at the time. And then they were married until like 2015 or so. So, but yeah, just a time of heartache for me. This is a way simpler, better time. I love Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner both very much. And I wish that we were back in 2003 and they were together again.
So yeah, anyone but Jen Garner.
Okay, I'm not going to say that I don't know. It's so hard because I look at this movie and I'm like, I don't know. I love them both so much. I don't know that either of them did a bad job or if what they were handed was just a bad movie. You know what I mean? Ben and Jen.
We can talk more about it in the Electra podcast, which will be coming up shortly, unfortunately.
Yeah, you better have a lot of trivia for that, Hunter. I'm going to be upset.
I can talk about Jennifer Garner all day.
The only other alternate casting I saw was for Foggy, Jon Favreau's character, and that was Donal Logue, which wouldn't have been bad, but we would have been robbed of Favreau, and that would have been very sad.
And we probably wouldn't have got the MCU. We wouldn't have gotten Iron Man, which is kind of weird. All right, let's move on to Best Scene. A lot of nominees for Best Scene in this movie. I've got a couple. I'm just going to go with it down the list. First I have is the Hoobastank montage.
Oh,
what?
Man.
There's a montage when it's in the flashback. He's a kid. He starts to use his powers, and all of a sudden Hoobastank starts playing. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Matt's face is because he doesn't know any pop culture references past 1975.
No, music-wise, pop culture references.
Yeah,
I've never heard that band name until
Hoobastank?
right now.
They sing
This is a
The Reason.
change. Yeah.
Anyway, that's number one. Second one I have is Justice for Quesada, at that whole scene where he goes into the biker bar.
Is that a band too? Oh no.
Third I have the playground meet cute fight.
That's definitely my fave.
I hate all
Spoiler
these
alert.
scenes so
I
much.
love that.
The playground fight is one of my least favorite moments in this entire movie.
You're one of my least favorite persons at this table.
No, hey, that's
Is
fine.
this how we end? Is this how our friendship ends?
He's not attacking Gartner in that playground. That's just the scene is
The scene is
crappy.
bad.
Yeah.
Next I have is seeing in the rain, when the rain comes and he can see her for the first time using his ultra.
Did you say seeing in the rain?
Yeah, I did.
Wow, Dan.
I also hate that scene.
It's a dumb thing to me because I don't think it would give him extra radar. If anything, he wouldn't be able to see anything because like everything's getting hit with water.
I've got the first time Bullseye meets Daredevil and he misses and he goes, I never miss, and he's all crazy and he's riding the motorcycle standing up and the rock music is playing. That is so awesome. I just love it
It's
so much.
so dumb.
I like Dan's passion for it.
Ugh. I wish I had had a drink in my hand for that because that was no good.
One of two Evanescence scenes I've got. First is the cemetery funeral of Mr. Nachos. Great emotional music there. And the second Evanescence scene that I know Kat loves is Elektra just training in her house, apparently listening to Evanescence.
She's perfect. But you know what? I don't know if this is the time to bring it up, but I really hate Evanescence. If you were to ask me what is your least favorite song of all time, it has always been My Immortal by Evanescence. And so hearing any of the Evanescence songs in this just like gave me instant eye rolls and groans.
I had the opposite reaction when I heard My Immortal. I was like, oh yeah, this song. But also the Elektra training scene with the sandbags is also terrible. I hate it.
It is terrible, but I think it's just because I enjoyed watching her work.
Also,
I know it's creepy, but I got nothing out of this movie. The fact that Jennifer Garner's a good-looking gal, I hate that that's all I'm taking away from this.
I've also got the Elektra Bullseye fight on the rooftop. I've got the church fight between Bullseye and Daredevil, and then I've got the final Kingpin fight.
I hate all those things. Like you just brought them up, like the church fight, like when the bats come out of the pipe. Like what a dumb bit.
Yeah, that organ fight looked really terrible. Just god awful.
Any other nominees for best scene?
How about when they introduce Fisk and it's just like the MetLife building and they put his logo in front of it, and it goes on for a very long time with some song that I'm sure you guys recognize, but I'm like, oh, it's just the sign of the times.
I didn't hate that by any means.
It's just goofy.
To be fair, in the director's cut, that scene's better. He kills his 2 bodyguards there.
Oh, that sounds
and it's
much
a little bit
better.
more of a that's not in the theatrical cut.
I mean, that and like Bullseye's intro, like in the pub, like that's brutal. I know you're asking for the best scene, and I'm just shitting on that.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because Bullseye's intro in the pub is on my list for best scenes because it's so stupid and Colin Farrell is just having so much fun with it.
I might give it to you there because it's better than the motorcycle. Like just him in the pub doing that is so dumb.
I did write when I was taking notes, Bullseye intro scene, and then after that I just wrote anything with Colin Farrell because he is my favorite part.
You know what? If I'm gonna go for best dumb scene for him, I guess I do hate the intro, but something about we'll put him on a plane and he'll flick a peanut into an old woman's mouth. That to me, that somebody had that conversation, that might be my favorite
That
scene.
honestly is probably what I remembered best about seeing this movie when I was a kid. Is like, oh yeah, it's the movie where Colin Farrell kills an old lady with a peanut.
Yeah, my vote for this is him riding the motorcycle. I just think that's so fun.
My vote was probably for the bar fight, but again, only the director's cut version because they added a lot of the violence back in, and there's actually some really good fight choreography in that one. I was surprised that I was impressed and not annoyed.
In the regular version, just what's that? And he's just in the corner.
But it does end with the great line like, "That's not the light at the end of the tunnel. That's the C train."
I'm sorry, you said the great line? That's so dumb.
Matt and Kat votes for best scene.
I'm sticking with that playground fight scene. I had a great time.
That is a nightmare, and I think most people compare that to the Catwoman scene that we'll have to watch later
Well-
for playing basketball.
Well, you know what? I think the tough thing is that the entire movie is just not very good. So I feel like the scene that I have to choose is the one that I maybe laughed at the most, and that's the playground fight scene.
And that's why I'm going to go with the peanut scene.
Let's go to Villain Corner, where we rate the diabolical plan of the villain. This is actually a category where I kind of like this movie a little better because the villain plan actually kind of makes sense.
Does it make sense because of the director's cut? Because I was going to say that it's kind of murky.
It's possible it's the director's cut, but it's really Kingpin wants to take over the city. He wants to silence his enemies. That makes sense. He's a mob boss. Like, he's not trying to take over the world. He's not crazy. He's like pretty logical in his reasoning of what he's doing. Bullseye is just a hitman, like he hires him. That makes sense. I don't think there's a lot of gray area in terms of what they're trying to do.
A little more depth to that is that his whole reasoning for killing Elektra's father is that he's trying to get out of business with him, and he's trying to pin Nicholas Nachios as the actual Kingpin so that he can kind of continue working under the radar.
Yeah, so with that being said, like I was under the assumption that he does control the city and he's just doing it as a myth, but people are starting to discover him, so he needed a scapegoat.
Sure.
And so it's like, I mean, his plan is to just business as usual, and he gets a little upset that there's Daredevil. I don't know, it just didn't seem like enough.
I just kind of appreciated the smaller stakes of the villain plan.
That's fair.
Going on to capes and tights, this is where we rate the superhero costumes. What do we think about Daredevil's red leather? What do we think about Bullseye's biker outfit?
I mean, if this was any other movie and you watched out of context, you would think that when he's like doing his suit up scene that it's like 50 Shades of Grey. He's going to like his like sex dungeon because it's just like he's got this apartment that's got a weird room and it's just leather clothing.
It's not a horrible suit because it does look like Daredevil, like you get the idea, but it is a weird, like it just doesn't seem functional. It's a bit leather daddy. It's like
It seems
it's not,
brighter red than I know I'm colorblind, but like I think it's
so he's more blind. So
yeah, that's fair.
I also want to bring up Jennifer Garner's green eye contacts.
I wrote something about that too because it was funny in the first scene that they show her. They're very, very vibrant, and then throughout it feels like they just got lazy with doing
aggressive.
the CGI on it. But
Well,
it is really
I want
bad.
to ask you, Matt, because you know the character better. Like, is her green eyes like a big character trait of her? Like, does Elektra need green eyes to be Elektra?
Off the top of my mind, I do not know that. I'm sorry.
I mean,
should have
it
brought
just
that
seems like an
tribute
easy
to it.
choice, being like, oh, she doesn't have green eyes. Okay, that's fine.
I will say again, as a colorblind person, I did not notice that
Oh, man.
as a problem. So
it is really aggressive
It's
and
fierce.
like, disturbing for Elektra's actual costumes, it really seemed they just really wanted to show off her boobs because that's about all they did.
From the beginning, that's basically her character, Tom. Her character traits are, oh, she's the one that's got the most cleavage, and she dies. That's literally when I think of her as a comic character. That's it. I mean, she dies, but she comes back. That's her character trope.
We should also mention that Bullseye wants a costume.
Oh
he
my
just
God.
never gets one.
That is so, I mean, his costume was kind of like meh, because essentially his costume would be basically like a mask similar to Daredevil, but like no horns, obviously, and it would have a bullseye where he has the tattoo. Yeah. So they had painted themselves in that corner from the beginning. I do think with like the tattoo, it's almost a little neo-Nazi-ish. Like I'm anti the tattoo. I don't know why.
Let's move on to our next question. Which side character deserved their own spin-off? And we won't count Elektra because she did get a spin-off.
I would watch a Kingpin movie. I mean, I don't necessarily know that I want the Michael Clark Duncan Kingpin movie or
maybe like a Godfather style. Like
yeah, I think that would have been
Rise.
really cool. Yeah.
Almost like an American Gangster type movie like that, like him rising through the ranks in early New York as a gangster. I think they could have gone that way.
And I think having watched Daredevil, the Netflix show, like that really attests to how good of a character Kingpin can be.
I just want more Bullseye because, again, like Colin Farrell was my favorite part of this movie, and to just like have Bullseye doing some, awful shit while he's making a name for himself as a killer would be pretty fun.
Imagine having to watch that, like where he truly never misses, like an origin story where it's just like kids never missed ever. It's like holy, like we need to call the news, and it's just like he's like a hero, and then I don't know. I kept trying to think of why he would ever break bad in any situation.
Yeah, I mean, we do get that mid-credit scene of him in the hospital. He still can, hit stuff, and it'd be really kind of fun to see him pop up in another movie. Maybe not another Daredevil movie, but if the MCU was more connected at this time, like does he show up in a Spider-Man movie? And it's kind of just like a fun cameo.
I just imagine like a terrible Oscar bait, like him through physical therapy, and then he finds out that like love never misses either, or something like that.
See, that's similar to my other joke, but again, it's a director's cut. But the Coolio case, I want that reframed as an intense courtroom drama where this man has been framed for murder.
Let's go to the producer's chair. If you could go back and change one thing about the movie, what would it be? Matt, we'll start with you. What was the one thing that bothered you the most?
My one note that I wrote for this section was, make it better. That's all.
I can attest to that. It does just say make it better on his notes.
Make it better. Just had some more brief flashbacks. I don't know if we needed to see.
I did count that whole flashback sequence takes up the first 19 minutes of the movie.
It's longer than it needs to
it's
be.
only an hour and 40-minute movie. Like that is a lot of time.
Also in that flashback, I don't know where we could fit this in questions wise or something to make fun of, but the product placement, the idea that his like super Irish boxing father would drink Heineken, like I laughed out loud because I'm just like, oof. And then Heineken showed up a few more times. I'm like, oh, I'm connecting the dots now. But like that could have been so much smoother. They could have like cranked out some more action in a different way by just shortening those 19 minutes, like you said. I would start there and maybe give that time to one of the villains, or I don't know. It's tough. It's also tough because I wouldn't introduce Elektra right away. That's one thing the Netflix show waited till season 3 because that relationship is its whole other can of worms. Like that relationship by itself without the origin could have been a film. It's just a man trying to clean up a city then at that point without
which is more what the director's cut is.
Okay.
My choice is, I'm not exactly sure if this makes it better or worse, but taking out the soundtrack. We haven't talked about the soundtrack much, but there are just so many songs that are just right from this era. And I don't know why, but for some reason, this era of music just doesn't translate very well. And like,
Not at
It's
all.
almost like the music was bad.
I mean, I don't know. I'm sure like maybe in 20 years, this will have a resurgence of like early 2000s rock, but just like
God, I hope I'm dead before that happens.
Oh my God.
for some reason, it just doesn't translate. And if you took it out and put like an actual score behind it, maybe it'd be better. Although maybe it just wouldn't be as fun then and maybe more brooding. And I literally laughed every time there was a song cue in this. And that obviously wasn't the intent, but it does make it kind of fun.
I have the soundtrack pulled up right now, and it's literally Seether, Nickelback, Evanescence, Hoobastank, Finger 11.
Just
Sounds like you guys made up
painful.
Hoobastank and like this is all a joke on me. I can't imagine. I mean, were they hoping to sell the soundtrack as like were like these songs like cutting edge when they came out? Like,
Oh,
were
I
they
mean,
the
they
newest?
definitely had their followers.
Okay.
They were like popular bands. They
So
were
I'm,
just
I'm sure
bad.
hiring a full orchestra was too expensive when they could sell this
and from
soundtrack.
what I've read, like Evanescence really got a big bump from this movie. Like this kind of made that song what it is.
I'm just get upset that people made money this way.
Yeah, I think because what I'm looking at right now is that Evanescence won a Grammy Award like shortly after this for Bring Me to Life. So I'm sure this probably did well in that sense. I don't know. Ugh.
Yeah, no, it was certainly like popular music choices at the time. So my choice here would be to make it 10 years later. Like it came at a weird time, post Spider-Man, but before they could really do a good Marvel movie where it was dark. But like if they had waited till after the MCU got established and then still like distance it from the MCU, but then I think they could have done something that was much less cringy and much more.
It's essentially boils down to make it better is basically.
But I think that it absolutely was a product of the time.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a cross between Matt and Dan for this one. The big thing I wrote down was Evanescence in general, because obviously, like I said, I really don't like that. And I do think it took away from some of the scenes because all I could think about was the song playing in the background. But yeah, in general, just make it better. I think it's always tough when you see a well done version of a superhero, whether it's a movie or a TV show, like Netflix adaptation of Daredevil. It's hard to watch this and not just kind of roll your eyes at it.
You know, we talked about casting earlier, and the Netflix show really nails the casting. I mean, you don't get better casting than Vincent D'Onofrio as the Kingpin. Like that's
fantastic.
So that's something where it's like having, you know, coming off being a fan of that show and then coming back and rewatching this, you do just see the things where like, oh man,
this could be so much
right.
better.
Like this story has so much potential, and then you see it robbed of all that.
Right.
Did watching this make you want to watch the Netflix show, Dan? I know you're
It
the
did
only one
actually,
here.
yeah.
You should give it a go.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to it. All right, I'm going to do a new category here. I've just invented this on the fly, but this is going to be Dan's Sports Corner.
Oh,
Wow.
we've invented this
Go
on the
ahead.
fly as though this wasn't a
Yeah.
product in the
Right.
making.
It's
And
right.
It's been shoehorned in since the start.
He's just trying to legitimize his crap.
Is this going to be a darts thing? That's the
Oh,
sports
no.
side.
I thought about that. This is more just a little educational piece for you guys. So
Oh, great.
Bullseye, he says after killing Nachos and Elektra, he's going to kill Daredevil. He says, I want the hat trick. Just so you guys know, a hat trick
Oh,
is
my
when
God.
you score 3 goals in a game. And typically you throw hats onto the ice or the field.
if I could change one thing about this movie, it would be Dan's contribution of Sports Corner.
You do know that hat trick is like a commonly used known
Yeah.
term, right?
We live in Minnesota. We've heard hat trick be thrown around.
Just give him his moment.
Go back to darts. Find me something about darts
I
or
thought
boxing. Come on, Dan.
I wanted it to be an actually nerdy like sport thing so that I know you like
That's it.
reveled in it.
No,
And that's what you
all I
came
had.
up with.
That's all I had. Let's move on to questions. What questions did this movie raise while watching? I have a question for you guys about Daredevil, the character. Maybe it makes more sense in the show, but like, does he have powers just beyond like the super sensitive stuff? Because he was like jumping around, like basically had Spider-Man's powers, like doing cool flips, jumping off buildings.
He would take so much fall damage that he does not take in this movie. I mean, they show his knees, I think, at least in the director's cut, they show his knees look damaged, but man, he would just crumple.
He doesn't have like super jumping. He's basically whatever the chemical was that went into his eyes affected his senses. So like he has heightened senses.
Right, I get
but
that.
that's it.
Yeah, because they don't do a very good job of explaining that because he looks just like he's like has
Spider-Man
no gravity.
practically. Yeah.
One question I had was after the C train comes along, I really don't think they would use 2 different stretchers to carry each half of Quesada.
That was just for comic effect.
Yeah, but you know, it's just impractical. It's impractical. More serious question. How do people not know that Matt Murdock is clearly gifted? Like he shoots baskets with Foggy. He beats up kids in an alleyway, which him slapping the dude, and then this may have been a director's cut thing too, but he slaps the kid repeatedly with a cane. And it's hilarious. Like, it's just the most insulting thing you could ever do.
I think it's one of those things where no one wants to be the guy to be like, you're not really blind. That's like
Right,
one of
yeah,
the worst taboos
right.
you can ever do. Is doubt
But like
a
when
blind
he's
person.
doing handstands on the edge of a building, like someone's way like, hey, I don't think that kid's entirely blind.
I'd consider it, but most people don't want to.
And then following up with another stupid question, how does Elektra not notice that super defined chin under that Daredevil mask? Because Ben Affleck, that's a chin. That's a chin you do not forget.
Indeed.
One kind of fun hypothetical is, what if Spider-Man showed up in this movie after like Spider-Man had huge success the year before. What if this was connected, and what if this was the start of the MCU?
I mean, they're clearly not even in the same town. Like, they couldn't even design New York to be even a little
Sure.
bit like it. It would break Spider-Man for me.
I'm just saying, like, if he shows up here and then we have Hulk like the same year, and that's our MCU going forward, who knows? Like, that's a whole different universe
They
there.
didn't have the gumption to ever tie those guys together. So, like, I just can't mentally think of them even trying that.
It is interesting though, because Kingpin was originally a Spider-Man character.
True.
And he did eventually become more geared towards Daredevil. But like, I do think that if they had known how successful Spider-Man was going to be before they started production on this movie, they probably would have linked it, and we would have a very different, superhero movie climate today.
All right, we've already talked about a lot of this already, but cringe factor. What aged the worst? What doesn't look good anymore?
Where do I begin?
I know we can go through everything, but for the most part, I think the thing that was most annoying for me was the CGI New York. It just like New York seems like such a big part of this character, and I never felt like I was in New York ever.
I mean, I admit most people won't know Hell's Kitchen if they saw it in a movie, but like the rest of New York should be pretty obvious.
The single worst thing, like the biggest offender in this movie, is Matt's creepy behavior towards Alexia.
Yes.
He sniffs her, and like, granted, he's a blind man, but don't be like, someone pretty just walked in. Like, that's the most disgusting thing. And he goes up and he follows her out of the restaurant. Like, he's a creep. Yeah, like, it's disgusting.
He like literally follows her and like grabs her wrist, and she like turns it on him.
Yeah, I wrote down that too. I don't know if it's like supposed to, like, are we supposed to think this is like, oh, cute? I don't know. Or like, oh, look at them. I don't know. As much as I love the two of them, it is pretty gross.
Could anything make you feel hotter though than being chased by a blind man?
Most things. Most things could. I don't know.
That
But
I was
like,
completely
so
joking.
like
bad.
this is at this point in Hollywood, like, no one's really calling out predatory behavior, and it's like this very male fantasy type thing, and it's always in movies and it's always gross, but like this one really struck me as ugh.
All right, let's finish with legacy. Will this movie live on for future generations? Is it a success?
Nope.
Nope.
It will live on as a Netflix show that should have been integrated to the MCU, but sadly was not.
Yeah, I think if this movie did not exist, I don't think anything in our history of superhero movies changes at all.
I'm trying to think, would Ben Affleck, he might have still ended up as Batman, we don't know.
Yeah.
My real question is, if this movie didn't exist, what would have happened with Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez? What would have happened with Jen Garner and Scott Foley? These are my questions. Like, would it have happened?
That's its only lasting legacy.
I'm sure they would have met in some shitty romance
They
Netflix
had
special.
met before, but I'm just saying, like, I feel like this was it.
But it's not until you fight on a playground in front of children that you really bond.
Yeah.
Okay, so Daredevil, we can just move on from. We do have Elektra in a couple episodes, but we'll get there when we get there. Next episode, we have a little bit better movie. We have X2.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that.
X2. We already did X-Men, so check that out if you want to, catch up on the podcast. But I'm looking forward to X2.
It was always really solid, so I'm excited to go back to.
I'll take the segue from Ben Affleck to James Marsden any day.
All right, guys, it's been fun. If you're on the podcast app or on YouTube, be sure to subscribe for more episodes coming your way soon. We will see you next time.